The Master, I and you make mention. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, translated by James Haughton Woods. We are still on Sutra 17 of Book 3. Supernormal powers are verboten. Number 17. He shows what it is like. He shows what it is that makes this distinct by saying, requires a single distinct effort, the effort of articulation, which makes the word rasa distinct, is different in character from that which makes the word sara distinct. Vyanjaka. This effort, moreover, is determined by the result. In the former manifestation of the word sara, in that it begins differently, it has a different succession of sounds, and this is the single and distinct effort. This is what was required. It is a thing without parts, because in reality it has no parts. These we only assume, because of certain similarities and dissimilarities. Hence also it is without a sequence of parts, because it has no definite succession. An objector says the sounds of the syllables have a definite succession, and they are parts of this word. How then can the word be without parts, and without a sequence of parts? In reply to this he says, it does not consist of sounds of syllables, for it does not have the sounds of the syllables as its parts. On the contrary, the word itself, because of certain similarities and dissimilarities, is generally assumed to have the form of this or that sound, and so appears in what is not its real form. For the faces, as reflected in a jewel or a sword blade, or a mirror, are not parts of the real face. It is a thing of the mind, made known by the mental process, which seizes in turn and binds together the sounds of the syllables. It is brought before us, are made an object, by the operation, vyapara, of the presented idea. Getting rumbly in the tumbly. Didn't finish eating. The final sound of the syllable, by operation, that is, of the subliminal impression of the final syllable, together with its subliminal impressions, generated by the experience of sounds of the previous syllables, for it has already adhastat been explained that the experience of the syllables and of the subliminal impressions arising from them are not the object of the word. The objector says this may be so, but if the word was such, padatattva has no parts or sequences or sounds of syllables, why is it not generally assumed to be of such a kind? For a bead of crystal, when overlaid with a coating of red dye, does not, when that coating is removed, cease to be perceived as transparent and white. Therefore, the sounds of the syllables are real parts of the word. In reply to this, he says, to another, if a man wish to convey information, he must express himself by, he must utter the very sounds of the syllables, to which the hearers must listen. The use of speech, to which no beginning can be assigned, depends on the words consisting of distinct syllables, and the subconscious impression produced by it has also no beginning. The mental process of the ordinary man, loka, is presented and pervaded, vasita, by this subconscious impression. and it has to do with the word constructed of separate sounds of syllables. Thus, as a result of usage, by the consensus of the elders, the word is thought as something real in itself, as having reality in the strict sense. What he means to say is this: there is a certain thing, the limiting condition, which is in correlation with the thing. Upakramatas means which is under consideration. To be expounded, to be exposed to limiting conditions, apatheia, and which is sometimes in correlation and sometimes out of correlation with it. Such a thing is red dye. Now, when this is out of correlation, the crystal shines forth in its natural, transparent, and white form. Well, obviously, there's different colors of crystals. Maybe we're talking about quartz here. Well, there's rose quartz, but, regular white quartz. And it is quite proper that the crystal should then shine forth. But the presented idea of the word, because it is not brought into consciousness, anutpada, by anything other than this particular sound, brought about by the particular effort of articulation, and insofar as this presented idea is always turbid with flaws and dissimilarity, can generate the presented idea of the word only as being in essence sounds of syllables. So how can there be the ordinary knowledge of a word when divested of its limiting conditions? And as they say, sounds, because in themselves alike bring about false notions. That which makes these sounds apperceived is the cause of this means which produce it. That is, the sounds of the syllables. There is an inevitable false notion. This results in an overthrow of all knowledge, and would cause an unfailing confusion of all dealings in the world, because the essence of a word shines out, turbid with separate sounds of syllables. For this reason, persons of not very fine insight, deeming the syllables themselves to be the word, use conventionally these very sounds of syllables, which have taken certain forms, with certain intended objects, as he says of this word, although by nature a janatas, a unity, is separated on the base of knowledge of the conventional usage of this word, to suit the purposes of persons whose insight is not very fine, as if its essence were separate sounds of syllables. He describes this separation of the word into sounds of syllables by saying this or that number, of this or that number that is neither more nor less, in some such kind, means a particular continuous sequence. The seizing in turn and binding together means under the influence of a single mental process. This is a word expressive of a single intended object, such as a cow. The objector says, if conventional usage is such a word expressive of a single intended object only, then, sir, there would be an erroneous identification of word and intended object. In reply to this, he says, but conventional usage, essentially memory, is that which in itself is memory. For conventional usage, merely because you can say that it prevails, krita, is not sufficient to define the intended object, but it must also be remembered. What he means to say is this: in a conventional usage, which makes no difference, a difference is somehow imagined, and therefore the genitive case is used to denote a distinction between the word and the thing. When one who knows the distinction between these three performs constraint upon the distinction, he becomes the knower of it all, and has an intuitive knowledge of the cries of all living beings. Now, you've heard of witches and binding spells and that sort of thing, perhaps. This, I guess, is the truth behind the concept of binding. But there's also the prayers of that, keep this person from, doing wrong, remove their opportunity to do wrong, that sort of thing. Or praying, that they die and at the time that is best for them, that could cut their life way short, but or could lengthen it. It depends, you gotta not make things purely about oneself. Thus, having analyzed that unit, the word which is without parts, although the parts are assumed to be in the sounds of the syllables, he says, with intent to analyze the sentence, which has an imaginary division into parts, but which is a unit and has no parts. Furthermore, every word has the power to express a complete sentence. The connexion of ideas is this: a word is used to convey information to another, and the other should have precisely that information conveyed to him which the words are intended to convey. And these words are also capable of giving that same information, which deals with acceptance or rejection, hana, or indifference, upeksha, and they do not deal tadgochara with the meaning, artha, of the word only, but with the meaning of the sentence. So all words must subserve the meanings of the sentence, and accordingly the meaning of the sentence is that these words also. It is for this reason that whenever a word is used alone, it is always associated with another word, and the sense follows from that word, but not from the first word used alone. Why? Because itself, tan matrasya, it has no capacity. Thus, it is the sentence that in all cases expresses the words, but the words do not. However, so forming parts of this, that is the sentence, the words also have expressive power with respect to the sense of the sentence, just as with respect to the word, the sounds of the syllables as constituting it have also expressive power. Thus, one interesting thing, some of these false claims, there's forgotten verses of the Quran, and just because you use Arabic words and put them together in a real sentence doesn't mean you're actually matching the expressive power of the language that you're saying. Oh, I've mimicked the Quran because I was able to write something in Arabic. It's like, no. Particularly when they just, here's some supplications, let's put them together and let's alter them a little bit, and it's just ridiculousness. Thus, then, just as each single sound of a syllable expresses the power to express all intended objects of words, so also each word embraces the power to express the meaning of all sentences. This is what is expressed by the words furthermore. Furthermore, every word has its power to express a complete sentence. Thus, when we utter the word tree, we imply that it exists. The meaning is that the word tree in conjunction with the implied word is leads to the meaning of the sentence. Therefore, as forming part of the sentence, the word tree produces that meaning. Tatra for tate. But if it be asked why the word is implied, the reply is, no intended object can lack existence. For the means of usage combines the means of the word as it is alone with the meaning is, and in all such cases makes the meaning of a sentence. The same popular usage is the meaning of a word which cannot lack existence. Hence those who know the functions of words have this agreement of usage. Vyavahara, where there is no other verb is in the sense of being should be used, having stated that a nominal base never lacks its action expressed by a verb. He shows that any particular verb is never without a relation by saying, and in what we utter. Oh, and so when we utter. For when we utter the word cooks, all relations which are suitable for association with it are implied. For this reason, there is an express statement of the special relations of this verb, and the purpose of this statement is to exclude other relations. Thus, the meaning of the sentence consists in nothing but the specializing of the relations. Similarly, although out of all relations a word is found to stand for the meaning of the sentence, and the sentence is still more potential in the words, so he says we observe. But this does not mean that the words like reader, which are complete in themselves, can present a meaning so long as they are not combined with words like is. So even in the case of this word, reader, as complete in itself, the meaning is to be assumed only insofar as it forms part of a sentence. It is this point an objector says this may be true, but if the words by themselves have the expressive power of the sentence, then there is no further need of the sentence, since its meaning can be ascertained from them. In reply to this, he says, and conversely in this sentence, and it has been said already that if there be a desire on the part of the speaker to convey information, the meaning of his words is not understood from the words alone, so long as these words are not brought in combination with other words. So then, supposing the words to be separated from the sentence, a part of it, the relation or the verb, is to be explained by analyzing and enumerating these words, by allotting the shares to this word, the bases, pratyaya, and so on. But why is so much trouble taken to go through this account of the analysis of words? In reply to this, he says, without such an analysis, because of the similarity of noun and verb in such cases as a water jar is bhavate, there, and O lady, bhavate, give an alms, and while your honor, bhavate, is standing, are similarly in such cases as thou didst go, achvas, and the horse, achvas, walks, are similarly in such cases as goat's milk, ajapayas, drink thou, and thou didst conquer, ajapayas, the foes, because there is a likeness in the form of the verb and of the noun. It is ambiguous whether the words might be analyzed as nouns or verbs. And when there is no such accounting for the form of the word, and because when withdrawn from the sentence it cannot be known whether it is a noun or a verb, how can it be analyzed as a noun or as a verb? Therefore, the words should be withdrawn from the sentence and analyzed. And there's a greater degree of difficulty in English in doing some of these things. We don't have a universal number value. We don't have semantics that apply to the whole language, nor linguistic origins in other languages. But by a mere accounting for the form of the word, there is not strictly speaking a distinction of the words from the intended object and the presented ideas, having thus treated the different kinds of words etymologically. I mean, real etymology, not this sounds like something in a different language, so it must somehow carry on the meaning, or maybe it did come from that language, but it carries on a different meaning. He has the intention of telling that in reality there is no confusion between words and intended objects and presented ideas, which he had got into confusion, as a result of conventional usage, which erroneously identifies one with the other and pretends to say there is a distinction between these words and intended objects and presented ideas. To illustrate this distinction, the palace whitens. Here the word means the action of a verb. For here it is quite clear that this action grows white, which is of a kind yet to be completed, and which takes place by a succession of acts, is different from the action white, which is of the completed kind. And even in those cases where both the word and the intended object are of a complete kind, there's also the word is different from the intended object, as he says, the White Palace. Here a relation is meant. Here there is no case ending expressing relation, because this is expressed by the nominative case according to Patanjali 2:3:1. He makes the distinction between the intended object and the word by saying, in essence, both an action denoted by a verb and a relation with the intended object of which the meaning is that the intended object of both these words is in essence an action denoted by a verb, and it is in essence a relation. He makes the distinction between the presented idea and the word by saying, and the presented idea. The word and shows that the words, the intended object of which is this, the action and the relation, are to be supplied. The word this is to be understood sampadhyate, as in subordination to another word, and a positive compound. It is so described as being that of which the intended object is in essence an action, denoted by a verb, and a relation, because they are understood as alike. An objector asks, since words and intended objects and presented ideas are confused, how can there be any distinction between them? With this in mind, he asks, but why is this so? He gives the answer by saying, because this process is identified with that. Its result, the quality, white. The presented idea, which identifies them, is limited by conventional usage, which erroneously identifies them with each other. But this presented idea has no basis in fact. The word conventional usage is in the locative case. This shows that the conventional usage is of the cause of the presented idea, which fails to distinguish the act of whitening and the quality white. He states what the real fact is in the words, but the white intended object is that which, intensely such as newness or oldness, correspond, that is, be confused. Thus, by the yogin's constraint upon the distinctions, he knows the cries of all living beings, tame and wild animals, creeping things, birds, and the rest, even the unphenomenalized speech among them and the intended objects, denoted by these cries, and the presented ideas of them. So in the case of constraint performed upon the presented ideas of the things expressed by the utterances of human beings, is performed upon these objects and words. Also, since they are comparable, thus it is established that the yogin has intuitive knowledge of these cries and of the objects intended by them, and of the presented ideas and the presented idea of them, since they are comparate. Okay. 18. As a result of direct perception of subliminal impressions, there is intuitive knowledge of previous births. Those subliminal impressions are, of course, of two kinds: the causes of memory and of the hindrances in the form of subconscious impressions. the cause of fruition in the form of right living and wrong living. Well, hopefully, sort of an R, but they both have results. So karma isn't one or the other. Karma is, these subliminal impressions formed in previous births are like mutation and movement, and restriction and power, and vitality, and right living, unperceived external aspects of mind stuff, Book 3:15. Constraint upon these is sufficient for direct perception of subliminal impressions. Moreover, there is no direct experience of these unless there be experience of place and time and cause. It is thus, therefore, as a result of intuitive knowledge of subliminal impressions, that the knowledge of previous births arises in the mind of the yogin, precisely as in other cases. There is also, as a result of the direct perception of subliminal impressions, a consciousness, samvedana, of the births of others. On this point, this tale is handed down that the exalted Isavya, who, as a result of direct perception of subliminal impressions, beheld the sequence of his birth mutations in 10 great creative periods, the knowledge born of discrimination becomes visible. Then to him spake the exalted Avatya, who had assumed a coarse body for the purposes of this speech in 10 great creative periods. Forasmuch as the sattva of thy thinking substance is unsuppressed by rajas and tamas in sequence of the spotlessness, thou beholdest the pain caused by birth in hells and in the bodies of brutes, coming into existence over and over again among the among those called gods and human beings. Jinn have respite, so perhaps but they can, all sorts of things are treated as gods. But I pursue devas is what we're talking about, so the light beings, not the fire beings, and human beings, which thou hast apperceived to be more pleasure or pain. Ja Ig Isavya spake to the exalted Avatya in 10 great creative periods. Forasmuch as the sattva of my thinking substance is unsuppressed by rajas and tamas in consequence of spotlessness, I behold the pain caused by births in hells and in the bodies of brutes. Well, we don't have to believe in reincarnation to understand the concept of, well, we've been put here in these physical bodies to go through something, and then the afterlife may have to go through something also. Coming into existence over and over again among the light beings and human beings. This I trow, whatever pleasure I have passed through all this is nothing but pain. The exalted Avatyas spake thus: Are your worship's mastery over the primary cause and the pleasure of bliss ineffable? Are these also to be counted as pain? The exalted Jaig Isavya spoke: This can be called the pleasure of bliss ineffable only in comparison with pleasure from objects of sense, but it is nothing but pain in comparison with isolation, because this bliss ineffable is an external aspect of the sattva, of the thinking substance, and so has the 3 aspects, guna, and because a presented idea of anything having the 3 aspects is counted as something to be thrown aside, the thread of desire in the bliss ineffable is of the nature of the pain. But by the removal of the anguish of the pain of desire, its pleasure of bliss ineffable is undisturbed calm, uninhibited, favorable in the eyes of all. So remember this difference between the, so we're going to see every little bit of good and truth and every little bit of evil and ignorance that we have, chosen. And we're going to be questioned about our pleasure. Of course, one of the things, the consciousness, we got to be, well, I captured that by adding the words good and truth, kind of mixing other passages into that idea. Our consciousness, our gratitude for the pleasures in life, realizing some stuff about them. 18. As a result of direct perception of subliminal impressions, there is knowledge of previous births. Well, we can tell ourselves to previous births, and if we don't tell ourselves to previous births, we're going to come up with a different explanation. For this, unless we say we're constantly being born into this body, every time our body changes, it's like a new birth. Just be conscious of it. For the subliminal impressions, which are produced by knowledge, are the causes of memory, whereas the subliminal impressions produced by undifferentiated consciousness are the causes of the hindrances, which, begun with undifferentiated consciousness. As to the cause of fruition, fruition is, Book 2:13, birth and length of life and kind of enjoyment. The cause of it are the kinds of right living and wrong living. The subliminal impressions put together in previous births are completed by their own particular causes, just as a curry, Vyanjana, is put together, samskrita, by combining many undistinguished things, so follows that it has been made. Mutation and movement and restriction and power and vitality and external aspects of the mind stuff. Likewise, the unperceived subliminal impressions are external aspects of the mind stuff. Constraint upon these, together with their attachments of place and time and cause, whether they are something heard or inferred, is adequate to bring past direct perception of both kinds of subliminal impressions. And if it be asked how there can be direct perception of previous births, even if it be possible to have direct perception of these subliminal impressions in place, time, and cause, through constraint, he replies, moreover, there is no of place, cause of the previous body, the organs, and the rest. Direct perception of the subliminal impressions with their adjuncts necessarily involves the direct perception of such things as births. This is the meaning. The constraint with respect to one's own subliminal impressions he extends by analogy to those of others also in the words precisely as in other cases also. With this in view, he introduces as an aid